Hi there, I'm Al, and in this video, I'm going to help you install OpenClaw. Now, before we do that, you might be wondering, well, what is OpenClaw? OpenClaw is a framework. It's a set of tools, a set of connections that allows you to connect your AI agent, typically an endpoint, to different capabilities. It's a way you can give it the ability to do stuff like write code on your local machine, edit files, delete files, read files, access the web for web search, connect to Discord, Slack, your favorite messaging platforms to send you messages and communicate with you in ways that you desire. It is what takes something simple like the basic Ollama functionality I showed in the last video and expands it to something that's a lot closer to the offerings of ChatGPT and Codex and the tools you have there. So OpenClaw, to begin with, requires a API endpoint to connect to. In our case, for this video, I'm going to be using Ollama for locally hosted LLMs. If you don't have Ollama installed, I'd recommend you give my previous video a look at. As in that video, I detailed how you can install Ollama. To begin with, to install OpenClaw, you simply need to go to their site, openclaw.ai, and copy this one-line install command. One thing I'd like you to note is that this requires Node. If you try installing OpenClaw without having Node on your machine, then it'll say you need sudo privileges to install Node first, and then to install OpenClaw. Strictly speaking, this isn't true. Modern versions of Node are installable without sudo by installing them in your user's home specifically. To do that, you can go to nodejs.org/en/download, and from here, you'll see this install script. I'm just doing it for Linux since I'm on Ubuntu, using NVM with npm since those default options typically work well. So if you copy this script, you run it in your terminal, it should install Node.js perfectly fine with no sudo needed. Once you have Node.js working, we can come back here, we can copy this command, and I will see you in the terminal in a second. Now that we're in the terminal, we can paste that command, but before we run it, there's a few things we need to run and check. So I'm going to create a new terminal tab. And the first thing we're going to do is go to ollama/bin, and we're going to run /ollama serve. But in addition, we're going to pass an environmental variable, specific Ollama context len equals 32,768. Basically, I'm saying the context length, the amount of past tokens that the model should consider, is 32K. Typically, I'd suggest using 64K or higher, but since I'm doing this tutorial on limited hardware and you might be having limited VRAM yourself, I'm just going to show it to you with 32K. Once I run this, you can see it's going to start up an API endpoint. This API endpoint is OpenAI compatible, meaning that any downstream application like OpenClaw that can consume an OpenAI API endpoint can also consume this endpoint. It communicates in the exact same way as OpenAI's API does. You can look here, you can see that this is running on localhost 11.434. That's quite important as we'll need to make sure that when we configure OpenClaw, we configure it to use this exact URL. Now I'm going to start a new tab, same location, and what I'm going to run is /ollama list. This can only be run once you've already served, and it shows which models I have available. This is important because when we configure OpenClaw, we'll want it to consume one of the models that we have available. If you try pointing it to a model that isn't available, then it'll fail. So in this case, I'm going to be using Qwen 3.59 billion parameters. You can see it's about 6.6 gigs. My GPU has 16 gigs of VRAM. If we add on maybe 2 to 3 gigs for the context length, then you can see that this fits comfortably in my GPU's VRAM. Another thing that's there to note is that if I used a context length that was absurd, let's say 262K, that would cause an overflow in my GPU's VRAM, then that would cause OpenClaw to fail. So at least for the first time you're using it, I'd suggest setting that Ollama context length parameter in the Ollama serve command to either 32K or 64K, so you don't get any weird bugs when you try to onboard for OpenClaw. Let's go back, let's install OpenClaw. You can see it says that Node.js is already found, so is Git. Node.js I showed you how to install, but Git, if you don't have it installed, should be pretty simple to install. Regardless, most Linux distributions come with Git pre-installed. So now it's going to finalize the setup. And once that is done, should be a couple seconds at most, it will start this setup session. I don't like this setup session myself. I know a lot of people don't use it as well, so I'd suggest just clicking Control-C a few times to exit from it. And instead, what we're going to run is OpenClaw onboard install. Damn it. When you run this, it's basically going to start this install interactive prompt. Before we go any further here, I want you to make sure that you are installing this in a safe user space. When you install OpenClaw, it has all the permissions of the user that installed it. So if you want to make sure that OpenClaw doesn't have access to private credentials or secrets or stuff that your AI agent shouldn't be able to access, the easiest way to enforce that is ensuring that the user that's running OpenClaw doesn't have access to those things. So if you're running this tutorial from a user account that has access to sensitive files, I would suggest you stop, you create a new user account that only has access to files you're comfortable sharing with your AI agent, and you continue this tutorial from there. With that disclaimer in mind, assuming you're working from a safe user account, let's continue with the setup. So I'm just going to go with quick start. We don't need, a more complicated setup for now. For the model auth provider, we're going to hit more. At the bottom here, you'll see Ollama, so we're just going to select that. Select Ollama again, local only. What this is doing is it's telling us that we want to use Ollama and we want to use local models, not cloud models hosted by Ollama themselves. That's because we want all the models we use for OpenClaw to just be run on our local hardware. So with this in mind, this base URL should match the server URL we saw earlier. In this case, it does, so I can just hit enter. If it didn't, you could change this URL here to match what Ollama is serving on. Once we run this, I'm going to browse all models because I actually don't want to use Gemma 4. I want to use Qwen 3.59 billion parameters. In your case, you might choose a different model depending on what's good at the time you're watching this video. You'll notice here it says context 262K. You don't need to worry about that. That's the maximum supported context. The actual context it'll run with is the context we configured when running our Ollama serve command. In this case, that's 32K. So I can safely run this. Now it's going to ask what channels we want. These channels are messaging channels. For now, we're going to skip it because configuring these channels involves a bit more work. In the future, I'll show you how to configure it as a Discord bot because I find that particularly useful. By configuring a channel, you give yourself the ability to talk to your agent in other locations because maybe you're not always, connected to your computer. Maybe you're away at work and you just want to interact with it through your phone. Then stuff like connecting it to Discord can make that a lot easier. But for now, let's skip. Similarly for web search is very important for a local agent. We're going to skip for now because I'm going to have a separate video on setting that up, installing and connecting it. But for reference, the web search engine I always suggest people use is SeerXNG. It's self-hosted, which as a home lab person myself, I really like. And it connects and queries a bunch of different search engines. Your general purpose ones like DuckDuckGo, to more niche ones like Wolfram Alpha, which is really good for math equations. So I find that it's a very comprehensive search engine, and that because it's so comprehensive, it kind of works a bit better for agents that can get a bit confused if they don't have enough context sometimes. But for now, let's just skip that. It's going to install any skill dependencies that it needs, stuff like MC Porter, which is used for managing MCP servers. Now it's going to start the gateway service and install it. This is a systemd user service, meaning it's going to run every time you log in as your user. I'll show you how to do something similar for stuff like Ollama and SeerXNG in the future, in a future video. But for now, we don't need to concern ourselves with that. We can simply run Ollama in a separate terminal tab as we did earlier when we need it. I'm going to say hello. You can see I get a response back. We're talking to our agent. That's nice. Um, let's say you want to set up OpenClaw. You want it to be configured with different personalities, different stuff like that, but you really don't know where to start. The easiest way to go about this is just to ask it, how can I set you up? OpenClaw is a very intuitive interface. So generally, rather than specific commands, you can just ask it things. So it's saying, follow bootstrap.md. In this case, I don't want to read that. I can tell it, can you follow bootstrap.md and walk me through setup in a step-by-step approach. Basically, I want it to give me a step-by-step kind of setup prompt. So you can see I said that, and it starts it out. And it'll update its MD files, which are kind of like its core identity, its perception of you, how it should operate based on your answers. For the purposes of this video, I'm not really going to dive further into this. If you follow these few prompts I've given you, you can essentially walk through the rest of the setup with it. Instead, what I'm going to do before I get it to set up stuff is I'm going to make a little text file, not in my home directory. You see ls-a, you'll see there's this .openclaw folder. So I'm going to go in there. I'm going to go in its workspace. And I'm going to make a little test.txt file. Inside here, I'm just going to say, hello world, how are you? Let's write that file. And what I want to check is I want to see if OpenClaw can see this file. Can you see a text file in your workspace folder? If so, what is written in it? If you're using a smaller agent like I am, you kind of have to be a little bit handholdy. In this case, I need to tell it, nope, look at test.txt. So now it finds it and it reads the file. Good. So it can read files in our thing. Let's see if it can write a file. I'm going to tell it, write a file called test2.txt with a response to the question in test.txt. So a little bit more complicated. Instead of just reading a file, it's got to write a file as well. And now If you check here and I hit ls, you can see that there is indeed a test2.txt. So I am going to read test2.txt, and you can see it has its answer here. So as you can see, with the core functionality, we already have access to more than Ollama itself did. We have access to this persistent file storage on device. It can interact with our local file system, create files, read files, do stuff like that. As I mentioned, local models, small ones in particular, are very handholdy. This is a 9 billion parameter model. Personally, for my home usage, I run a 27 billion parameter model, which is Quantum 3.6, 27 billion. You can choose a size that fits in your VRAM and works for you. Bigger models will be less handholdy, but they'll require more computation. So I'd say try out a few different models with OpenClaw. Find which one fits that balance of doing things you ask it and not being beyond your means in terms of your VRAM. I'd recommend you run through the rest of the setup from bootstrap.md with your AI agent, and I'll see you in the next video. If you like this video, I'd suggest liking, checking out the rest of the playlist. We're going to have more videos coming out soon, detailing how to expand upon this functionality with stuff like web search and channels.